They say love is blind, but betrayal? Betrayal has a way of ripping the scales from your eyes, leaving you exposed, vulnerable, and utterly alone. This isn't just a story about a broken heart. It's about a life systematically dismantled, a trust brutally violated, and the chilling truth that sometimes the most respected faces hide the darkest secrets. Just wait until you hear what I found hidden in plain sight. My name is Maria Rodriguez. For 20 years, I was the devoted wife of Robert Sterling, a man revered in our community. He was the charismatic leader, the philanthropic visionary, the one whose name graced every charity event and whose speeches moved crowds. Our life from the outside was a testament to success, a beautiful home, a thriving social circle, and a seemingly unbreakable bond. I was the quiet strength behind his public persona, managing our home, supporting his endeavors, and believing, with every fiber of my being, in the man I married. I believed in his integrity, his dedication, his unwavering commitment to our shared future. I was the woman who had it all, the respected wife of a respected man, the one who always had a kind word and a supportive smile, until the day the spotlight shifted, not to celebrate him, but to expose the rot beneath the polished surface, until the day the man I loved, the man I trusted, publicly shattered my world, leaving me not just heartbroken, but financially ruined. The announcement came like a thunderclap on a clear summer day. Robert, my husband of 2 decades, stood on the podium at the annual Community Leadership Gala, a place where we had shared so many triumphs, so many moments of shared pride. He cleared his throat, a familiar gesture before one of his eloquent speeches. But this time, the words that followed were not about community development or charitable initiatives. They were about us, about me, and about her. Maria and I have decided to separate, he began, his voice calm, almost detached, as if discussing a business merger. It's an amicable decision, one we've reached after much consideration. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drum against my ribs. Amicable? He hadn't spoken to me about this. Not truly, not in a way that suggested mutual agreement. And then she appeared. Chloe, his assistant. Young, vibrant, and clinging to his arm with a possessive grip that spoke volumes. She was barely out of college, a fresh face in the firm, someone I had always treated with kindness, even mentorship. The flashbulbs erupted, capturing the scene. Robert, the respected leader, with his new young conquest, and me, standing alone in the crowd, my world collapsing around me. The whispers started immediately, a cruel, buzzing chorus of speculation and pity. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on me, stealing my breath. It wasn't just a separation. It was a public execution of my marriage, my dignity, my very identity. He had chosen the most public stage, the most brutal method, to announce his betrayal, leaving me exposed, vulnerable, and utterly shattered. The pain was so profound, so absolute, that for a moment I thought I might simply cease to exist. But then, a flicker of something else ignited within me. A cold, hard resolve. I would not break. Not here. Not now. Not for him. The heartbreak was immense, but the financial reality that followed was a brutal secondary blow. With Robert gone, the illusion of our shared prosperity began to unravel. I tried to access our joint accounts, to understand the extent of our assets, to plan for my uncertain future. But the numbers didn't make sense. The balances were shockingly low, far lower than they should have been, given Robert's substantial income and our seemingly comfortable lifestyle. Disbelief warred with a growing dread. I checked the statements again, then again, scrutinizing every transaction. Large sums, hundreds of thousands, even millions, had been systematically siphoned off over the years, transferred to unfamiliar accounts, labeled with vague, innocuous descriptions like business expenses or investment opportunities. My hands trembled as I scrolled through years of statements, each page a fresh stab of betrayal. This wasn't just recent indiscretion. This was a long-term, deliberate pattern of financial draining, a slow, insidious bleed that had left me financially vulnerable, teetering on the brink of ruin. The house, our home, was mortgaged to the hilt. Our savings, once robust, were virtually non-existent. He hadn't just left me. He had stripped me bare, leaving me with nothing but the crushing weight of debt and the bitter taste of his deceit. The realization was a physical blow, leaving me gasping for air in my own home. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted implicitly, had been systematically stealing from me, from us, for years. The infidelity was a public spectacle, but the financial betrayal was a silent, calculated act of destruction, far more devastating in its long-term impact. I was not just heartbroken, I was financially ruined, and the path forward seemed impossibly steep. The shock and despair eventually gave cold, burning anger. I knew I couldn't face this alone. I needed help. I needed legal counsel. But finding the right lawyer proved to be another daunting challenge. Robert's influence in the community was vast, his reputation seemingly unblemished. Several prominent law firms, after initial consultations, politely declined my case, citing conflicts of interest or heavy caseloads. It was a subtle form of intimidation, a clear message that challenging Robert Sterling would be an uphill battle, if not an impossible one. I felt a growing sense of desperation, a fear that I would be swallowed whole by his power and influence. But I refused to give up. I researched tirelessly, late into the night, searching for anyone, who would be willing to take on a case against a man of Robert's stature. I finally found her. A small independent firm specializing in complex financial fraud and high net worth divorces. Her name was Miss Evelyn Reed, and her reputation was for being tenacious, fearless, and utterly ruthless when it came to uncovering hidden assets and exposing white-collar crime. Her office was modest, a stark contrast to the opulent law firms I had initially approached, but her eyes held a steely resolve that gave me a flicker of hope. I laid out my story, the public humiliation, the drained accounts, the systematic financial betrayal. She listened patiently, her expression unreadable, occasionally jotting down notes. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy. Then she looked at me, her gaze piercing, and said, "Mrs. Sterling, this won't be easy, but I believe you, and we will fight for every penny you are owed." It was the first glimmer of light in the suffocating darkness, the first sign that I wasn't entirely alone in this fight. Miss Reed, true to her word, immediately began her investigation. She brought in a forensic accountant, a quiet, meticulous woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, whose reputation for tracing hidden money trails was legendary. Together, they began to peel back the layers of Robert's financial life, and what they uncovered was far more sinister than simple marital infidelity. The systematic draining of our joint accounts was just the tip of the iceberg. Dr. Sharma's initial findings revealed a complex web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and fraudulent invoices, all designed to funnel vast sums of money away from our legitimate businesses and into a shadowy network of untraceable transactions. This wasn't just a husband stealing from his wife. This was a sophisticated financial scheme, meticulously planned and executed over many years. The business expenses and investment opportunities were elaborate fictions, covers for illicit activities that went far beyond personal enrichment. The realization hit me with a fresh wave of nausea. Robert wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a criminal, a master manipulator who had used his public persona as a shield for his illicit dealings. The betrayal ran deeper than I could have ever imagined, extending into the very fabric of his public life, his community work, his philanthropic endeavors. Every dollar he had donated, every project he had championed, now felt tainted, a cruel mockery of his supposed integrity. The infidelity was a public spectacle, a brutal personal blow, but the financial fraud was a silent, calculated act of destruction, far more devastating in its long-term impact, not just on me, but on countless others. I was not just heartbroken, I was a victim of a criminal enterprise, and the path forward seemed impossibly steep, fraught with dangers I couldn't yet comprehend. As Miss Reed and Dr. Sharma continued their meticulous work, a strange, unsettling pattern began to emerge from the periphery of Robert's financial dealings. Several of the shell companies he used for his illicit transfers were also linked to various struggling businesses and properties that had recently been acquired by a shadowy investment group. And then I found it. A series of discreet, almost untraceable financial transactions, hidden within Robert's personal accounts, linking him to these acquisitions. A fleeting thought, a whisper of unease, suggested that Robert's financial fraud wasn't just about personal enrichment or supporting his lavish lifestyle. There were subtle mentions of distressed assets and strategic takeovers in his hushed phone calls, all linked to these struggling ventures. It looked like Robert's affairs and his public persona were not just about personal gratification or maintaining appearances. They were a distraction, a brilliant, cruel smokescreen. While he was busy charming and manipulating his mistresses and cultivating his image as a community leader, a far more insidious plot was lurking beneath the surface. A plot to exploit vulnerable individuals and their failing businesses for financial gain, all under the guise of legitimate investments. The betrayal was a dagger, but these financial breadcrumbs, these brief, unsettling glimpses into a world beyond simple financial fraud, felt like a poison, slowly seeping into the very core of my being. It hinted at a deeper, more insidious betrayal, a connection I couldn't yet grasp, but one that promised to unravel far more than just my marriage. This wasn't just about a broken heart. It was about a broken trust on a much grander, more manipulative, and potentially criminal scale. And I had only just scratched the surface of a criminal enterprise built on a foundation of calculated exploitation. And then there was Chloe, Robert's young assistant, the woman he had publicly chosen over me. My initial feelings towards her were a complex mix of anger, pity, and a strange sense of shared victimhood. Was she a willing participant in his schemes, or merely another pawn in his elaborate game? As Miss Reed and Dr. Sharma delved deeper, they found subtle connections between Chloe and some of the shell companies, small transactions, almost imperceptible, but enough to raise a red flag. It seemed Chloe wasn't just a mistress. She was an unwitting accomplice, perhaps even a victim herself, manipulated by Robert's charm and promises. Her youth, her ambition, her desire for a fast track to success, all exploited by a man who saw everyone as a means to an end. The thought of her, young and naive, caught in Robert's web, sparked a flicker of something unexpected within me. Not sympathy, but a recognition of a shared vulnerability. She was, in her own way, as much a victim of his manipulation as I was. This realization, unsettling as it was, opened a new avenue of inquiry, a potential crack in Robert's carefully constructed fortress. If Lovely was indeed a victim, then perhaps there was someone else, someone closer to her, who might hold the key to unlocking the full extent of Robert's deceit, someone who had also been betrayed by her manipulative ways, someone who might, unexpectedly, become my ally. The initial shock of Robert's public betrayal and the devastating financial revelations had left me reeling, teetering on the brink of despair. The legal battle ahead seemed insurmountable, a lonely fight against a man whose influence permeated every corner of our community. Ms. Reed and Dr. Sharma were relentless in their pursuit of justice, but the sheer complexity of Robert's financial machinations, the layers of shell companies and offshore accounts, made progress agonizingly slow. I was facing financial ruin, the loss of my home, and the crushing weight of public scrutiny. Desperation, a cold, sharp claw, began to grip my heart. I felt isolated, abandoned, a pawn in a game I hadn't even known I was playing. But then, a flicker of hope, an unexpected breakthrough, emerged from the most unlikely of sources. Miss Reed received an anonymous tip, a cryptic message hinting at a connection between Chloe, Robert, and a man named Mr. Davies. The name meant nothing to me, but Miss Reed's eyes, usually so stoic, held a flicker of intrigue. "This could be interesting, Maria," she said, her voice a low hum of anticipation. "Mr. Davies is a very powerful man, and he has a history with Chloe." The thought of finding an ally, especially one connected to Chloe, was both unsettling and strangely exhilarating. Could this be the crack in Robert's fortress I so desperately needed? Could this be the turning point in my fight for justice? I was willing to grasp at any straw, any thread that might lead me out of the suffocating darkness. Our first meeting with Mr. Davies was in a discreet private room at Ms. Reed's office. He was everything I expected, sharp, impeccably dressed, with eyes that missed nothing. But beneath the veneer of the shrewd businessman, I sensed a deep-seated pain, a quiet fury that mirrored my own. Ms. Reed introduced us, and he cut straight to the chase. "My daughter Chloe," he began, his voice devoid of emotion, "has always been ambitious and manipulative. She betrayed me, just as she betrayed you, Mrs. Rodriguez." He laid out his story, how Chloe had systematically siphoned funds from his own business, how she had used his contacts and his reputation to further her own schemes, how she had abandoned him when her deceit was exposed. His betrayal, though different in nature, resonated deeply with my own. He spoke of Chloe's insatiable greed, her cunning ability to charm and exploit, and her ruthless disregard for anyone who stood in her way. He had spent years trying to expose her, to warn others, but her carefully constructed facade had always protected her. Until Robert. Robert, it turned out, was not just Chloe's lover. He was her partner in crime, a mentor in deceit, and together, they had woven a web of financial fraud that extended far beyond my personal accounts. Mr. Davies' motivation was clear, not just to see justice served for his own betrayal, but to dismantle the entire criminal enterprise that Robert and Chloe had built. He saw in me not just a victim, but a weapon, a means to finally bring down the daughter who had broken his heart and the man who had corrupted her further. Our shared pain, our common enemy, forged an unlikely alliance, a bond born of betrayal and a burning desire for retribution. With Mr. Davies on board, the investigation accelerated at an astonishing pace. His resources, his network of contacts, and his profound understanding of complex financial structures were invaluable. He brought in his own team of forensic accountants and private investigators, a shadowy group of experts who operated with a quiet efficiency that both impressed and unnerved me. We worked tirelessly, poring over mountains of documents, digital records, and encrypted communications. Mr. Davies' expertise in business and finance, combined with my personal knowledge of Robert's habits, his social circles, and his subtle tells, allowed us to connect dots that had previously seemed disparate. We uncovered a labyrinthine network of fake invoices, shell companies registered in obscure offshore havens, and meticulously manipulated financial records. We found evidence of Robert using his public persona, his reputation as a community leader, to lure unsuspecting investors into fraudulent schemes. He would promise high returns on legitimate-sounding projects, only to divert the funds into his own illicit accounts. Chloe, it turned out, was not just an unwitting accomplice. She was an active participant, using her charm and her connections to facilitate the scams, to sweet-talk victims into handing over their life savings. The sheer audacity of their operation was breathtaking. They had preyed on the trust of an entire community, using their positions of power and influence to enrich themselves at the expense of others. Each new discovery, each piece of damning evidence, fueled my resolve, transforming my heartbreak into a cold, burning determination. This wasn't just about my money. It was about exposing a criminal enterprise that had systematically defrauded countless innocent people. The most heartbreaking revelation was the discovery of other victims. As we traced the money trails, we found a pattern of similar financial losses, similar stories of betrayal, all linked back to Robert and Chloe. There was Mrs. Henderson, a retired school teacher who had invested her life savings in a fraudulent charity project Robert had championed. There was the small business owner, Mr. Chen, whose company was driven to bankruptcy after a partnership with one of Robert's shell corporations. There were dozens, perhaps hundreds of individuals and families whose lives had been shattered by their deceit. Each story was a fresh stab to my heart, a painful reminder of the ripple effect of their greed. We reached out to them, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence as they realized they were not alone. Their initial disbelief and shame slowly transformed into a collective anger, a shared desire for justice. Many of them had been too embarrassed, too intimidated, or too financially devastated to seek legal relief on their own. But with Mr. Davies' resources and Miss Reed's legal expertise, they found a voice, a collective strength they never knew they possessed. The individual battles against Robert's influence now coalesced into a unified front, a powerful movement for accountability. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was our fight. A class action lawsuit brewing on the horizon, a tidal wave of justice poised to crash down on Robert and Chloe's meticulously constructed world of lies. The shared purpose, the common enemy, forged an unbreakable bond between Mr. Davies and me. Our initial interactions, born of necessity, evolved into a deep, unspoken understanding. We were two individuals from vastly different worlds, united by a profound betrayal. He saw in me a resilience he admired, a quiet strength that belied my initial vulnerability. I saw in him not just a shrewd businessman, but a man deeply wounded by his daughter's deceit, a man seeking redemption through justice. We spent countless hours together, poring over documents, strategizing, sharing our pain and our hopes. He became a mentor, a confidant, a surrogate father figure in a time when my own family felt distant and fractured. We celebrated small victories, a newly uncovered bank account, a confirmed fraudulent transaction, and commiserated over setbacks. Our conversations extended beyond the legalities, delving into the complexities of human nature, the corrosive power of greed, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The alliance, born of betrayal, blossomed into a genuine friendship, a testament to the unexpected connections that can emerge from the ashes of devastation. He had lost a daughter to manipulation. I had lost a husband to deceit. Together, we found a shared purpose, a renewed sense of meaning in our fight for justice. This wasn't just about recovering my financial stability. It was about healing, about finding purpose in pain, and about ensuring that no one else would suffer at the hands of Robert and Chloe's ruthless ambition. As our investigation deepened and the sheer scale of Robert's financial fraud became apparent, Mr. Davies began to notice a disturbing pattern. Several of the shell companies and offshore accounts Robert used were also linked to a series of high-profile political campaigns and seemingly legitimate charitable organizations. A fleeting thought, a whisper of unease, suggested that Robert's financial fraud wasn't just about personal enrichment or supporting his lavish lifestyle. There were subtle mentions of political donations and campaign contributions in his hushed phone calls, all linked to these organizations. It looked like Robert's affairs and his public persona were not just about personal gratification or maintaining appearances. They were a distraction, a brilliant, cruel smokescreen. While he was busy charming and manipulating his mistresses and cultivating his image as a community leader, a far more insidious plot was lurking beneath the surface. A plot to launder money, to influence political outcomes, and to secure lucrative contracts for a shadowy network of powerful individuals. The betrayal was a dagger, but these political breadcrumbs, these brief, unsettling glimpses into a world beyond simple financial fraud, felt like a poison, slowly seeping into the very core of my being. It hinted at a deeper, more insidious betrayal, a connection I couldn't yet grasp, but one that promised to unravel far more than just my marriage. This wasn't just about a broken heart. It was about a broken trust on a much grander, more manipulative and potentially criminal scale. And I had only just scratched the surface of a criminal enterprise built on a foundation of calculated exploitation and political corruption. The decision to file a class action lawsuit against Robert Sterling was not made lightly. It was a monumental undertaking, fraught with risks, legal complexities, and the daunting prospect of challenging a man whose influence seemed boundless. But with Mr. Davies by my side, and the growing chorus of victims eager for justice, the path forward became clear. We held a series of meetings, discreetly at first, then more openly, bringing together the dozens of individuals and families Robert had defrauded. There was Mrs. Henderson, the retired schoolteacher, her eyes still clouded with the pain of losing her life savings. There was Mr. Chen, the small business owner, his once thriving company now a hollow shell. Their stories, their shared pain, fueled our collective resolve. Miss Reed, our tenacious attorney, meticulously explained the legal strategy, the uphill battle we faced, and the potential for public scrutiny. She warned us of Robert's likely counterattacks, his attempts to discredit us, to paint us as greedy, vengeful individuals. But the victims, united by their common suffering, were unwavering. They had nothing left to lose and everything to gain: justice, dignity, and the hope of rebuilding their shattered lives. The class action lawsuit was not just a legal document. It was a declaration of war, a collective roar against a system that had allowed a man like Robert Sterling to prey on the vulnerable for so long. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a burning conviction. This was bigger than me. This was about holding power accountable, about protecting the innocent, about transforming our pain into a powerful force for change. The legal stage was set, and the curtain was about to rise on Robert Sterling's final act. The lawsuit unfolded like a meticulously choreographed drama, each legal maneuver a calculated strike against Robert's carefully constructed facade. The media, initially skeptical, quickly became enthralled by the unfolding narrative of a respected community leader exposed as a ruthless con artist. Our legal team, led by Ms. Reed, presented irrefutable evidence. The forensic accounting reports detailing the systematic draining of accounts, the shell companies, the offshore transfers. We had dozens of witnesses, the victims themselves, each bravely recounting their stories of financial ruin and emotional devastation. Mrs. Henderson, her voice trembling but resolute, described how Robert had charmed her into investing her life savings in a fraudulent charity project. Mr. Chen, his eyes burning with a quiet fury, detailed how his business had been systematically dismantled by Robert's deceptive partnerships. Robert, initially arrogant and dismissive, grew increasingly agitated as the evidence mounted. His legal team, a phalanx of high-priced corporate lawyers, tried every trick in the book, delaying tactics, character assassinations, attempts to discredit our witnesses. But their arguments withered under the weight of the undeniable facts. The court, initially reserved, began to show signs of impatience with Robert's evasiveness. The public, initially divided, rallied behind us, their outrage growing with each new revelation. The testimony of Chloe, Robert's assistant, was particularly damning. After much deliberation, and with Mr. Davies' quiet influence, she agreed to cooperate, providing crucial insider information about Robert's schemes, detailing his manipulative tactics and his ruthless disregard for his victims. Her testimony, delivered with a mixture of fear and a dawning sense of remorse, painted a chilling picture of Robert's true character. The air in the courtroom was thick with the truth, undeniable and suffocating. This wasn't just a lawsuit, it was a public dissection of his deceit, a brutal reckoning for his financial fraud and personal betrayal. The verdict was a resounding triumph for justice. The jury found Robert Sterling guilty on all counts: fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The judge, in a scathing rebuke, condemned his actions, citing the profound damage he had inflicted upon countless lives. The sentence was severe: a lengthy prison term and a mandate to repay every penny he had stolen, a sum so vast it would ensure his financial ruin for the rest of his life. The news exploded. Robert Sterling, the respected community leader, the philanthropic visionary, was now a convicted felon, his name synonymous with deceit and betrayal. His public image, once meticulously crafted, shattered into a million pieces. His career, his reputation, his freedom, all gone. The media, which had once lauded him, now tore him apart, exposing every detail of his illicit dealings, every victim he had exploited. His former associates, eager to distance themselves from the scandal, publicly condemned him. His social circle, once vast and influential, evaporated overnight. He became a pariah, a cautionary tale, a symbol of unchecked greed and moral decay. I watched, not with glee, but with a grim satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about accountability. It was about ensuring that his manipulative tactics, his predatory behavior, would never again find fertile ground. The public had spoken, and their verdict was clear: guilty. His carefully curated image, the one he had used to deceive so many, was now irrevocably shattered, replaced by the ugly truth of his character. The fall from grace was absolute, a fitting consequence for his calculated greed and betrayal. He had sought to ruin my life. Instead, he had ruined himself, financially, socially, and personally. Chloe's involvement in Robert's schemes was complex, a tragic blend of ambition, naivety, and manipulation. She had been drawn into his orbit by his charm, his promises of a fast track to success, and perhaps a genuine affection for him. But as the lawsuit unfolded, her complicity became undeniable. She had facilitated his fraudulent transactions, manipulated documents, and actively participated in luring victims into his schemes. Her testimony, while crucial to our case, also laid bare her own culpability. The judge, acknowledging her cooperation, gave her a lighter sentence than Robert, but the consequences were still severe. A suspended sentence, a hefty fine, and a permanent stain on her record that would effectively end any hope of a legitimate career. Her public shaming was profound. The media, initially sympathetic to her as a victim of Robert's manipulation, quickly turned on her as her active role in the fraud became clear. She was abandoned by Robert, who, in his desperation, tried to shift all blame onto her. Her social circle, once filled with aspiring young professionals, evaporated. She became a pariah, a cautionary tale for those who sought shortcuts to success. Mr. Davies, her father, watched her downfall with a mixture of sorrow and grim satisfaction. He had tried to warn her, to guide her, but her ambition had blinded her to the dangers of Robert's influence. Her manipulative ways, once a source of frustration for him, had ultimately led to her own undoing. The poetic justice of it was not lost on me. She had gained nothing but a ruined reputation, and in her ambition, she sealed her own professional and personal demise. Amidst the wreckage of their lives, my own began to flourish. The class action lawsuit not only secured Robert's conviction, but also resulted in a substantial financial settlement for all the victims, including myself. With the help of Miss Reed and Mr. Davies, I recovered my financial stability, rebuilding my life on a foundation of hard-earned justice. The public acknowledgement of Robert's crimes, the validation of my truth, was a powerful balm to my wounded spirit. I was no longer just Robert Sterling's ex-wife. I was Maria Rodriguez, a woman who had stood up for herself, who had dared to expose the truth, no matter the cost. The support I received from the other victims, from the community, and from unexpected allies like Mr. Davies was overwhelming. Strangers reached out, sharing their own stories of financial abuse and manipulation, thanking me for my courage, for giving them a voice. My story, once a private torment, became a beacon of hope for countless others trapped in similar webs of deceit. I used my newfound platform to advocate for victims of financial abuse, to shed light on the insidious ways power and influence can be used to control and exploit. I received invitations to speak at conferences, to consult with legal aid organizations, to share my experience with those who needed it most. The vindication was profound, a testament to the power of truth. I wasn't just rebuilding my life, I was building a movement, a community dedicated to justice and liberation. The public humiliation had been a catalyst, forcing me to confront not just Robert's lies, but the systemic vulnerabilities that allowed such crimes to flourish. And in doing so, I found a deeper, more authentic version of myself, a survivor, an advocate, a woman empowered by her own strength. As I immersed myself in my new role as an advocate, working with Miss Reed and Mr. Davies to identify and support other victims of financial abuse, a strange, unsettling pattern began to emerge. Several of the individuals Robert had defrauded, particularly those whose businesses were on the verge of collapse, had one thing in common. They had all, at some point, been clients of a specific, highly exclusive private bank, the Obsidian Trust. And then, I found it. A series of discreet, almost untraceable financial transactions hidden within the Obsidian Trust's records, linking Robert's fraudulent schemes directly to a much larger, more sophisticated money laundering operation. A fleeting thought, a whisper of unease, suggested that Robert's financial fraud and Chloe's complicity were merely symptoms of a much larger, more deeply rooted problem within the financial underworld. The affairs, the public persona, the community leadership, they felt like a distraction, a brilliant, cruel smokescreen. While Robert was busy charming and manipulating his victims and cultivating his image as a respected leader, a far more insidious plot was lurking beneath the surface. A plot to launder vast sums of illicit money through seemingly legitimate channels, all facilitated by the Obsidian Trust. The betrayal was a dagger, but these financial breadcrumbs, these brief, unsettling glimpses into a world beyond simple financial fraud, felt like a poison, slowly seeping into the very core of the global financial system. It hinted at a deeper, more insidious betrayal, a connection I couldn't yet grasp, but one that promised to unravel far more than just Robert's crimes. This wasn't just about a broken heart. It was about a broken trust on a much grander, more manipulative, and potentially criminal scale. And I had only just scratched the surface of a global financial conspiracy. The class action lawsuit against Robert Sterling concluded with a resounding victory for justice. Robert, stripped of his public persona, his wealth, and his freedom, was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. Chloe, his young assistant, received a lighter sentence due to her cooperation, but her reputation was irrevocably tarnished, her ambition shattered. For me, the immediate aftermath was a complex tapestry of relief, vindication, and a profound sense of responsibility. The Sterling name, once a symbol of prestige, became a byword for deceit and corruption. Their vast network of influence, built on a foundation of lies, began to unravel, exposing the rot beneath the polished surface. Business partners, eager to distance themselves from the scandal, severed ties. Their philanthropic endeavors, once lauded, were now viewed with suspicion, their motives questioned. I watched, not with glee, but with a grim satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about accountability. It was about ensuring that their manipulative tactics, their predatory behavior, would never again find fertile ground. The public had spoken, and their verdict was clear: guilty. Their carefully curated image, the one they had used to deceive so many, was now irrevocably shattered, replaced by the ugly truth of their character. The initial storm of sensationalism eventually subsided, replaced by a quiet, determined resolve within me. The grand house, once my gilded cage, now felt like a mausoleum of shattered dreams. I sold it, eager to shed every last vestige of a past that had become a lie. The process was painful, a constant excavation of emotional debris, but each step forward, no matter how small, felt like a victory. I was shedding the old skin, preparing for a new beginning, a new chapter built on authenticity and truth. The public exposure was a crucial first step, a necessary act of personal justice, but the true work of rebuilding, of healing, had just begun. And this time, I was building on a foundation of genuine connection, not hidden agendas. Healing, I discovered, was not a linear path. It was a winding road with unexpected detours into grief, anger, and profound sadness. The emotional scars of betrayal ran deep, but I was determined not to let them define my future. I sought professional help, engaging with a therapist who guided me through the labyrinth of shattered trust and emotional trauma. It was a difficult, often painful process, but essential for true recovery. I reconnected with old friends, those who had stood by me, offering unwavering support without judgment. I rediscovered passions I had long neglected, finding solace in long walks in nature, the quiet contemplation of art, and the challenge of learning a new skill. My story, once a private torment, became a beacon of hope for countless others trapped in similar webs of deceit. I used my newfound platform to advocate for victims of financial abuse, to shed light on the insidious ways power and influence can be used to control and exploit. I received invitations to speak at conferences, to consult with legal aid organizations, to share my experience with those who needed it most. My voice, once silenced by fear, now resonated with strength and purpose. I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was building a movement, a community dedicated to justice and liberation. The transformation was profound, not just for me, but for the countless individuals who found their own voices through mine. The financial fraud, once a source of my pain, had become the catalyst for my greatest personal triumph, a testament to the enduring power of integrity and the strength of the human spirit. I learned to trust my instincts again, to recognize the subtle signs of manipulation, and to value authenticity above all else. My journey was far from over, but I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, a warrior, armed with the truth and a renewed sense of self-worth. Mr. Davies, my unexpected ally, remained a steadfast friend and mentor, his own healing intertwined with mine as we worked together to bring justice to others. Our shared purpose became a powerful force for good, transforming our individual pain into a collective mission to protect the vulnerable from the very kind of predators who had nearly destroyed us. As I immersed myself in my new role as an advocate, working tirelessly with Miss Reed and Mr. Davies to identify and support other victims of financial abuse, the unsettling pattern I had glimpsed earlier became terrifyingly clear. The Obsidian Trust, the exclusive private bank linked to several of Robert's victims, was not just a conduit for his illicit funds. It was a central hub for a vast, international money laundering operation. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about Robert's financial fraud or Chloe's complicity. This was a far grander, more insidious scheme, a global network of illicit wealth, and the Obsidian Trust was its beating heart. We uncovered a labyrinthine web of shell corporations, phantom charities, and seemingly legitimate businesses, all designed to funnel vast sums of dirty money through the global financial system. The victims, we discovered, were not just individuals like Mrs. Henderson or Mr. Chen. They were often unwitting pawns in larger, more complex schemes, their financial ruin a mere side effect of a much grander design. The distressed assets and strategic takeovers Robert had orchestrated were not just about personal enrichment. They were about acquiring legitimate businesses to serve as fronts for the money laundering operation. The depth of their depravity was staggering, far beyond a simple financial fraud. This wasn't just about a broken heart. It was about a broken global financial system, a calculated conspiracy that had used the very fabric of legitimate commerce as its ultimate shield. And the true masterminds behind it all, the ones pulling the strings, were still out there, hidden in the shadows, manipulating markets and governments from behind the impenetrable walls of the Obsidian Trust. Robert, I realized with a sickening lurch, was merely a small cog in a much larger, more terrifying machine. His affairs, his public persona, his community leadership, they were all just a distraction, a brilliant, cruel smokescreen to divert attention from the true scale of the operation. The betrayal was a dagger, but these global financial breadcrumbs, these brief, unsettling glimpses into a world beyond simple financial fraud, felt like a poison, slowly seeping into the very core of the global economy. It hinted at a deeper, more insidious betrayal, a connection I couldn't yet grasp, but one that promised to unravel far more than just Robert's crimes. This wasn't just about a broken heart. It was about a broken trust on a much grander, more manipulative, and potentially criminal scale. And I had only just scratched the surface of a global financial conspiracy that threatened to destabilize economies and corrupt governments. Suddenly, every seemingly innocuous detail, every fleeting moment of unease, coalesced into a terrifyingly clear picture. The Sterling family's sudden, unexplained wealth, their rapid expansion into new ventures? Not just shrewd business acumen, but the fruits of illicit money laundered through the Obsidian Trust. Robert's frequent business trips to obscure financial centers? Not just legitimate dealings, but clandestine meetings with the architects of this global scheme. The investment opportunities he offered to his victims? Not just personal scams, but a way to inject dirty money into the legitimate economy, making it untraceable. The hints I had dismissed as mere red flags of financial impropriety were, in fact, breadcrumbs leading to a vast criminal enterprise, a global network of illicit wealth and power. The Obsidian Trust, with its impenetrable secrecy and its powerful clientele, was the key. It was the nexus where legitimate finance blurred with the darkest corners of the underworld. Robert, I now understood, was not just a community leader. He was a facilitator, a recruiter, a trusted operative within this global network. He had used his impeccable reputation, his social standing, and even the emotional vulnerabilities of his victims as a shield for his illicit gains. He had played me, Chloe, and countless others like puppets on a string, all for the ultimate prize, illicit wealth and unchecked power on a global scale. My initial triumph over Robert felt hollow, replaced by a cold, simmering rage at the audacity of this global scheme, its manipulative genius. They hadn't just cheated me, they had used me, exploited my trust, and turned my life into a stage for their criminal enterprise. But now, I had the knowledge. I had the true blueprint of their systemic deception. And this time, my retribution would be far more devastating, far more permanent. The game wasn't over. It had just entered a new, far more dangerous phase, one that would expose not just Robert, but the entire network of corrupt individuals who had helped the Obsidian Trust build its empire on a foundation of global fraud. I stood before the towering glass facade of the Obsidian Trust, its polished surface reflecting the cold, indifferent city. The secrets, once hidden within its impenetrable vaults, now screamed from every polished pane. The truth, once a whisper, was now a roar. They thought they had won. They thought they had gotten away with it. But they had underestimated me. They had underestimated the power of a woman scorned and the collective strength of a community united by truth. And they had forgotten one crucial detail. In the world of finance, every transaction, every hidden account, eventually leaves a trace. And some secrets, once unearthed, refuse to stay buried. They fester, they twist, and they will always, always find their way back to the surface. Because the real game, the one they never saw coming, has only just begun. And this time, there will be no escape. Not for Robert, not for Chloe, not for the Obsidian Trust, not for anyone involved. The blueprint for their systemic destruction is now complete, and I'm ready to expose every single line of their hidden ledger. Are you ready to see what happens when the global financial system reveals its darkest secrets?